Yeah, so I think my deepest memories go back to when I was 4, and there was a lot of trauma um, in my childhood, and there was abuse, neglect, and so I remember being 4, and that's when I started to shut down, and I would like you weren't going to see me cry. That wasn't going to happen. To me, that showed people that you couldn't hurt me. If you didn't see me cry, then you weren't able to hurt me. There were things in my childhood done to me that I took on as sin myself, and which grew. Along with that came depression, and as a child, I did not know what depression was, so it took being an adult to realize that that's what I went through in childhood, the anxiety and the depression. But because I shut down at such an early age, that really hindered me from getting the help that I needed as I got older. And so sin grew, depression grew. When I look back at being around 8 years old and my house catching fire, that's hard for me for a couple of reasons. I remember seeing the house on fire. A neighbor had taken me to her house. Her daughter and I were really good friends. And I remember as we were watching out the window, and there were fire trucks leaving and an ambulance leaving. And my friend was crying, and I remember her mom consoling her and hugging her, and I just remember looking out the window, and inside I was crying, and I was traumatized, and I was devastated, and I was scared, but I couldn't show that outwardly. And I look back at that, and it's never left me. That moment has never left me, because it was a time where I needed to be comforted, but I couldn't show people that I needed to be comforted. That, moving forward, never left me, but I just did not know. I knew emotions were important if I was going to get the help that I needed, but I just didn't know how to get to that point. So I was raised in church. We were in church every Sunday, and I'm very grateful and had a wonderful church family. But so what would happen is, from childhood on, as a teenager, and then after high school, I stayed in constant inner conflict, within myself, spiritual conflict of wanting to walk with the Lord, and but not reaching out to get, help. For years, my depression just continued to grow, and I got married when I was 21, and so I took all that with me into marriage, and thankfully I have an amazing husband that loved me well, has loved me well for 30 years. At 22, I was a mother, which I loved. But again, I was just mentally unstable, not knowing, how to deal with life, not knowing how to deal with my past. And so it was constant turmoil for me. Fast forward then to 2004, with Tony started a job in Sevierville, Tennessee. And so we moved. I was 7 months pregnant. And I thought everything was fine. I was doing okay. And then, so Micah was born, and he is our third child. And I had severe postpartum depression. So at that point, I was put on medication. And that's when things I thought they were bad enough, and then that's when things went really wrong. I didn't respond well to the medications, and somehow I ended up on multiple medications and all these side effects. And so when we moved to Sevierville, Tony, my husband, started leading worship at a little church in Cosby, Tennessee. And it was really awesome. We had a great church family there. I was struggling with postpartum. I was helping Tony lead worship, and I just, again, felt like, okay, I'm living this secret life. I didn't want to be struggling. I didn't want to walk in sin. I didn't, but it's not that I was like choosing, like wanting to live separate lives. I just didn't know how to reach out. I decided to reach out for help again. And I remember going to this counselor. The first day, the first appointment that I had with her, at the end, I'll never forget it, but she looked at me and she said, "Robin, I'm glad you're here. It's nice to meet you and nice to talk to you." She's like, "But the truth is, I don't know why you're here, and I don't know how I can help you." Because again, here I am in my 30s at this point, and I sat down with a smile on my face, and like I always did my whole life. And so I remember on the inside just thinking, oh my gosh, I really need help. And it felt like a rejection. Here I am again, reaching out for help, but nobody sees that I really need it. I went home and I started writing, and I just started writing my whole life out. And so the next week I went back and I handed her these letters. And I wouldn't read them because if I had of, I would have had to cry. And but she sat there and she read them out loud. And that was actually the beginning of a very long period of healing. From there on out, for weeks, I would go in every week with my letters. And that's really how we communicated. Eventually, there was a moment where I think I read a letter and then I started crying. And so other than my husband, nobody was gonna see me cry. And so at this point, I was probably 34 or so. And that was huge for me, because I was never going to heal. I was never going to begin the healing process if I couldn't show emotions, because in order to talk about it, I knew that I couldn't talk openly and seriously about it all without expressing. And so that moment of learning to express was huge. It wasn't easy. We continued our sessions for probably over a year. And but a lot of the sin issues that I had dealt with, and then of course the depression and everything, came to light. Unfortunately, I continued on all these medications, and I did not realize that medications caused or can cause these side effects. And I don't want to say I'm anti-medication. I didn't understand that, and so I was led to believe that I was getting worse. And I didn't know that it was the medicine. So I spent 12 years on these medications and not realizing that that's what was happening to me. But so that was still difficult in trying to heal from the depression, because I would still have all these side effects, and I didn't realize that I needed to come off of them. In 2008, Tony decided, we had been praying about seminary, and Tony ended up making a decision to go to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina.
During that time, I think it was 2009, is when we went on a missions trip together as a couple to Mexico, and so that's when we met our future daughter, Andrea, in an orphanage, and took us 3.5 years to get her here. But when we came back, after we settled in, after we got Andrea 3.5 years after meeting her, we settled back in at home, then here comes the depression again. That's when the doctor had suggested electroconvulsive shock treatment, which Tony was not for, and I guess I decided my doctor knew best. And so that's, I mean, the Lord has turned things around, and I can see Him in everything, but I want to say it's one of the biggest regrets. If I have regrets, it would be, one of the biggest in my life. But so when I did the treatments, I think I did 25 treatments in a couple of months, and then I lost a lot of memory, and so I lost almost 3 years worth of memory, and then chunks leading up to 12 years. And then I haven't recovered. Cognitively, the ECTs really did some damage that we didn't know if I was going to recover from. Thankfully, I have. And then with the memory loss, there was just a lot of struggle even to get around town. So there were so many issues with me and not knowing what recovery looked like. So it's when we made the decision to find a home for Andrea. And that was devastating. After that, I got to a point where, like, after 12 years on medication, and I do remember this day standing in my kitchen, telling Tony, like, what is the point of all of this? Like, 12 years of what? Like, our lives have been, like, destroyed, more so than they ever were before I had gone on these medications. And I want to be careful, because I'm not saying don't be on your medication. I'm telling my experience. I was on the wrong things. And so I went to my doctor, and he helped me wean off. And after that, though, I was able to start thinking more clearly and realizing that there were a lot of issues from my past that I had to deal with. And it's almost as if, like, I believe that was the moment where the Lord was like, now's the time. And He started walking me through this path, a long path. Nothing happened overnight. It meant that I was going to have to face the past, and that I was going to have to deal with a lot of the traumas from my childhood, which I had always struggled to do. So after we had made the decision to find a home for Andrea, there were issues within our church. We became disconnected from the church, and after the ECTs and the decision with Andrea, and I, being booted off the worship team and not fit for ministry, and so that was very painful. And my husband reached out to the church and got no reply, and reached out again and no reply, and that was when he said he'd never step foot in a church again, which is strange considering that we moved there for seminary. But I think just so much trauma and hurt and pain, and then when you need the church the most, and then they're not there, it's just very painful. A pivotal moment for us in this whole shift, as far as running back to the Lord and experiencing freedom, happened in December of 2020. And my grandmother helped raise me. She lived in Bristol, Virginia. My grandmother was facing the possibility of going to a nursing home, and I had a very close relationship with her. So Tony said, let's go. So we committed in December of 2020. However, we could not get here to the area until March of 2021. So 3 months later, we moved back here to Bristol, Virginia, to the area. We had sold most everything or given it to our kids, and we were going to live with my grandmother, and I was going to care for her full time. And when we made the decision for me to care for her, she was not near death. Moved here on the 22nd, and the 27th, she passed away. So I'm very grateful for those 5 days that I got to be with her, and I got to be with her in the end. And but at that time, when she passed, it was shocking because we didn't have a place to go. So we moved into this little house and lived there a year, and we decided to buy the house. So there we're living. I miss my space, but that was definitely a God thing. It was just a moment of knowing that the Lord was taking care of us. So during this transition from my grandmother's house to home, my Tony, he collapsed at work, and he hit the marble floor. And so because of that, the ER doctor was like, well, let's just keep him overnight just to check on things, make sure everything's okay. So that night I stayed all night with him, and I woke up to the nurses running in, and his heart had stopped beating. And I think that was the moment. I'd had all these little moments. I had missed the church. I had missed, fellowship with believers, and I knew that I still loved the Lord, but I wasn't connected, and I wasn't obeying His word. I wasn't in the church, and but I think it was that moment of just knowing, I can't do this anymore. I cannot do this alone. It was too much. The following day after his hospital stay, he received a pacemaker, and we didn't know he had any heart issues. So we started coming to Celebration. We just started slowly getting involved, and I started seeing Hetty. They were having a marriage retreat, and there was a couple there who shared their testimony. But as they were sharing, I remember just out of nowhere, this overwhelming sense and this presence from the Lord, and Him saying, I am not done with you. I've never been done with you. And I had never heard or sensed something so clearly, because I thought, and I know what Scripture says, but in my mind I thought, I've messed up my whole life. That weekend changed me. Everything was different in my life. Spiritually, I just felt this new awakening. One morning I walked in my kitchen, and I stopped, and I thought, okay, something's different today. It was weird. It was noticeable. I thought, it was extremely noticeable. And I just stood there, and I'm like, what's different? And I hadn't been depressed, but still things just felt different. I realized, Lord, you have done something. You have lifted something from me. But it was almost as if He had lifted a weight off of me that I had carried my whole life. Almost like a weight that I didn't even know was there, was just gone. And as the months progressed, thinking, okay, there's this newness, and there was this new freedom in me. Even in the hard times, like I'm still experiencing joy, and in years past I didn't know how to experience joy in the presence of the Lord when things were bad. I understand now what hope is. I'm very grateful, for that, and that I can actually finally look back at my life and see where the Lord can use certain things that I didn't understand how He was ever going to use.